What began as a quiet move in Washington has just triggered one of the biggest geopolitical fires of the decade. The United States wants South Africa out of the G20. But what they didn't expect was the global backlash. Brics is furious. India is stepping onto the front lines. And from the heart of West Africa, a rising Pan-African powerhouse in Burkina Faso is leading a continental pushback. This isn't just politics, this is a clash for the future of global power. And Africa, this time, Africa is not backing down.
The world did not expect the storm that came that morning. It began not in the dusty plains of the Sahel, nor in the bustling energy of Johannesburg, but in Washington, D.C., where the United States administration held a late-night emergency press conference. The White House press room, normally calm at such hours, was alive with an electric tension. Reporters from the world's largest networks had gathered without warning, summoned by a cryptic note from the administration. Major announcement regarding the G20. And then, at precisely 2:13 a.m., the news broke. The United States had officially declared it would push to remove South Africa from the G20. The announcement hit global media like an earthquake. Social feeds exploded. Markets trembled. Diplomatic channels across Africa lit up like a burning savanna. The U.S. accused South Africa of drifting too close to Brics interests and claimed Pretoria no longer upheld the democratic principles expected of a G20 member. But the accusation felt hollow, thinly veiled geopolitics wrapped in a fragile excuse. What the world saw was a simple truth. The U.S. was threatened by the rising power of Brics, and South Africa had become a symbol of a shifting global order. By dawn, South Africa's skyline glowed purple and gold under a winter sunrise, but the mood on the ground was tense and expectant. Rumors spread through townships, suburbs, campuses, and marketplaces. Even the wildlife reserves, where rangers listened to radios while patrolling under silent acacia trees, felt the ripple of uncertainty. President Naledi Fikhathi, South Africa's fiercely intelligent and widely respected head of state, convened an emergency cabinet meeting. Her face was calm but stern, her demeanor unshaken. As she stood before her ministers, she said only one thing. Today, Africa is watching us. Across the continent, another leader was watching even more closely. In Ouagadougou, where the red earth of Burkina Faso carried stories of struggle and resistance, Captain Ibrahim Sankara Traoré had already called his advisors before the sun rose. The Pan-African movement he was spearheading had been growing in strength and influence far beyond the Sahel, igniting a sense of sovereignty across a continent tired of being dictated to. As he listened to the U.S. announcement, his jaw tightened, not out of fear, but conviction. South Africa's seat, he said quietly to his military advisor, is not theirs to give or take. And Africa will not allow this humiliation. To the Sahelian leader, the attack on South Africa was an attack on Africa as a geopolitical entity, a message from Washington that Africa's rise would be punished. But this time, Africa was not alone. The call came from New Delhi within hours. India's Prime Minister, Arjun Dev Sharma, known for his strategic brilliance and quiet steel, reached out personally to both South Africa and Burkina Faso. He saw what others saw. The U.S. was attempting not just to target South Africa, but to crack Brics from within. And India was not going to let that happen. Prime Minister Sharma's message was simple. We stand with Africa. If they target one of us, they target all of us. The phone calls traveled like lightning. Pretoria, Ouagadougou, Moscow, Beijing, Brasilia. Brics leaders exchanged encrypted communications, some short, some furious, some deeply calculated. Within hours, Washington's move had set off one of the most intense geopolitical standoffs of the decade. But the spark that would ignite the counterattack came from an unexpected place, the African streets. In Lagos, thousands gathered outside the U.S. consulate with placards reading, "Hands off Africa." In Nairobi, university students marched, chanting Pan-African anthems. In Dakar, crowds erupted in front of the French embassy, interpreting the U.S. move as part of a wider Western pressure campaign on African sovereignty. In Johannesburg, Pretoria, Cape Town, skies were filled with the thundering drums and voices of a continent rising. A single phrase began trending across the continent. Africa will not be removed. And from Burkina Faso, the Pan-African vanguard responded. Ibrahim Traoré delivered a televised address watched by more than 300 million people across Africa. He stood against a backdrop of the Burkinabe flag, desert sands stretching behind him like the endless horizon of African resistance. "These are not the days of old," he declared. "These are not the days when foreign powers decided Africa's destiny while we remained silent. If they remove South Africa, then they must remove all of Africa. And if they try to divide us, we will unite like never before." The speech went viral. West Africa erupted in support. Even leaders who had previously stayed neutral felt the pull of a resurgence of African pride. Suddenly, the U.S. found itself facing not a single nation, but an entire continent. And Brics had only just begun to respond. India released a diplomatic bombshell. If the U.S. forced a motion to expel South Africa, India would walk out of the G20 summit entirely. China and Brazil issued similar warnings. Russia went further, hinting at a major recalibration of its engagement with Western trade bodies if South Africa was targeted. The U.S. had expected resistance, but not this level of coordinated defiance. And then came the strike that completely shifted the global mood. At a joint press conference in Addis Ababa, a historic coalition was unveiled, the Pan-African Sovereignty Bloc. For the first time in modern history, African nations, led by South Africa, Burkina Faso, Kenya, Rwanda, Algeria, Egypt, Nigeria, and 20 others, announced a formal agreement to defend the political sovereignty and international representation of any African country targeted by a foreign power. But the most surprising part came when India signed on as the bloc's first external supporter. The hall erupted when Prime Minister Sharma declared, "India will defend Africa's right to lead, not follow. And we will not stand by while our friends are undermined for choosing a multipolar world." It was a geopolitical earthquake. Brics nations followed suit, endorsing the bloc and publicly warning the U.S. that such pressure tactics would have consequences. The entire narrative shifted. What began as a U.S. attempt to isolate South Africa had now isolated the U.S. Instead, Western media began to panic. Analysts described the diplomatic backlash as unprecedented, catastrophic, a global revolt against U.S. dominance. Meanwhile, African social media celebrated the rise of a united front, something elders had prayed for, something youths had demanded. In Washington, the administration found itself unable to back down. Pride, politics, and global pressure collided in a disastrous vortex. The U.S. moved forward with its plan to present the motion at the upcoming G20 summit in Geneva. And that decision set the stage for one of the most dramatic diplomatic showdowns in modern history. The summit hall in Geneva was a fortress, security tight, cameras everywhere, tension visible in every corner. Delegates whispering, ambassadors sweating, analysts refreshing live feeds every second. South Africa's President Fikhathi walked in with the calm of a seasoned warrior. Beside her was a delegation that symbolized global change. Brics officials, African Union representatives, Pan-African leaders, and economic strategists from Burkina Faso. They were not there to plead. They were there to stand. The U.S. delegate arrived with a thick binder labeled "Motion to Review South Africa's G20 Membership." As he placed it on the table, murmurs rippled across the room. But the moment the session opened, everything changed. The chair recognized the U.S. representative, who began reading. "The United States proposes the immediate suspension of South Africa's." Boom. India's Prime Minister Sharma stood. India formally objects. Before he could sit down, China rose. Then Brazil. Then Russia. Then, like a rising tide, the entire African bloc stood as one. Dozens of nations. One movement. The cameras in the room sounded like machine guns. President Fikhathi spoke clearly and powerfully. "South Africa does not stand alone. To remove us is to remove Africa. And Africa does not exit this room quietly." Traoré added, his voice like rolling thunder. "If this motion proceeds, we walk out. All of us." India's Sharma continued. "And without Africa and Brics, there is no G20. Only an empty room. Silence." The U.S. delegate froze, panic flickering across his eyes. He glanced at European allies, but they looked away. None dared challenge this united front. Finally, the chairperson cleared his throat. "The motion is dismissed." A roar of applause erupted from the African and Brics delegations. The U.S. team shrank back, stunned and humiliated. The battle was over, but the victory was only beginning. In Johannesburg, celebrations filled the streets. In Ouagadougou, fireworks lit the night sky. Across Nigeria, Ghana, Tanzania, Botswana, and beyond, Africans celebrated a moment they had waited generations to witness, a united Africa standing for itself and the world taking notice. In Pretoria, President Fakathy addressed the nation. Today, Africa was not divided by borders. Today, Africa was one. In Ouagadougou, Traoré declared, "We have proven that Africa no longer asks for a seat. Africa brings its own chair." And in New Delhi, Prime Minister Sharma reaffirmed his message. The future is multipolar, and Africa is one of its pillars. The U.S. returned home isolated, having failed to fracture the global South. Instead, America had unintentionally strengthened Brics, accelerated African unity, and exposed the limits of Western influence. The world would not forget this moment. The day Africa stood firm. The day Brics drew a line. The day India backed a continent. The day Burkina Faso's Pan-African wave became unstoppable. And the day South Africa, against all odds, kept its seat at the global table.